Kentucky is a better team than people give them credit for, frankly. Now, Joey Gatewood, I understand, had a pretty good spring kid from Jacksonville. We'll see how that holds up. But Mark, people may not realize this. Kentucky had David. He sure can recruit the best of them. Kentucky had 6 guys taken in the draft. I mean, Mark, that says something for what Mark Stoops has done at that school. Listen, I still say if Kentucky wins early, that Auburn game was an officiating fiasco. And frankly, Kentucky had that game won. You remember that Ole Miss Kentucky game?
Sure.
That had as much controversy in that one too. Listen, if they win those games, and they had a slew of injuries, I really wonder, because we all thought at the beginning of the year that Kentucky would be a top 3 team in that division, along with Florida and Georgia. So that's a so I like Stoops, and frankly, with what he's done, it reminds me a little bit of what Rich Brooks did there in that great bowl run that they had. Mark, if he stays there another 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years, I think they need to put a statue of him outside of the stadium.
Well, Brent, I was raising my hand when you were talking about what could have been for Kentucky last year, because I certainly took a beating and still do. Every couple of days, somebody will remind me that I went out on a limb and picked Kentucky to win the SEC Eastern Division. And yes, I did. And
but listen, in fairness, I'll say this, and you remember this like I do. Going into last year, we knew they were probably a quarterback away from being a really solid club, and we weren't quite sure who that was going to be at that point. Obviously, Terry Wilson gets hurt, and you kind of go from there. But look, I know that was going out on a limb. I get it, but I'll be the first to say I was as impressed with that Kentucky team going into the season as just about anybody in the league.
Hey, Brent, I'm going to make a parallel to another Eastern Division team that sounds a lot like the way you just described Kentucky. When I was watching the NFL draft, I was seeing in the middle rounds players coming off the board off that Missouri defense and the offensive line, Larry Roundtree, and of course, Nick Bolton, the star of the defense.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people, despite those NFL losses, like Missouri to stir things up in the Eastern Division.
I love Drinkwitz and what he's done. I think he's as imaginative as he can be. So, no, I listen, I don't dispute that at all. And I still thought it was last year that, and look, I get the record with Stoops, by the way, but again, he started, if you look at the end of it and then the beginning of it, it's 2 different records, frankly, at that point. But I would still say Roundtree was a guy that never got the credit he deserved. And frankly, was one of the more, could you argue, Mark, he was one of the more dependable backs in the league?
Absolutely. Over the entirety of his career.
Yeah.
He has been. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Mizzou, an interesting club that is almost always down in those final 2 or 3 spots of recruiting rankings, but able to develop talent, now working on a 3rd coach here in the last 6 to 7 years. I remember being somewhat surprised that this looked like a program that was overmatched when it entered the league. I believe their opening SEC game was a game against Georgia at home, in which they were just beaten up and run up and down the field. And they had a rough first year in that 2012 year, the first year that, of course, A&M and Johnny Manziel joined as well, and had much more success. But by 2013 and 14, good old Gary Pinkel was getting his team to Atlanta.
Yeah, look, Pinkel never got the credit he deserved at Missouri. And look, I'll go one step further, Mark, and I know the game got out of hand early. Do you remember the Alabama game last year in early September. Bama had that game in hand. Missouri made a really valiant effort in the fourth quarter, came back and made that game certainly closer, and really kind of showed some moxie of what they're capable of doing. So, and we didn't quite know how good Alabama was going to be with Mac Jones at that point. But I remember distinctly how hard they fought and how well they played. Missouri did in the fourth quarter of that Bama game.
So we are going to update Lewis's statistic there, Brent. Mark Stoops is 23-14 the last three seasons with three consecutive bowl victories over three pretty good football teams.
Well, and look, I'll make this. I'll also say this: what would they do during that time if they had a really steady quarterback? When you look at them, and it was Bowden, right? They put the wide receiver Bowden at quarterback, and I mean they knew he was going to run the ball. So, and even that, they couldn't stop him. I remember the bowl game when he was just Superman, frankly. So my thing with that is how look, we're not saying Kentucky's going to win the division necessarily, win the SEC, but what we're saying is this is all proof of what Stoops has done. And I'll still say, Mark, that if they had a really dependable quarterback, say that they had one guy instead of 6 over the last 3 years, how much better that club would have been.